So it finally looks like Alpha 10.6 has reached the experimental branch, and now you guys are able to get your hands on this all new CPU system, flight model, HV and SV docking, and many more other features. As always, I'm not going to go through the entire forum and read it out to you. What I will do is link down below in the video description a link to the official forums where you can read at your leisure the full patch notes for Alpha 10.6 experimental build. They have, however, highlighted in summary the features that this includes, which is of course the CPU and tier system, new flight mechanics, pilot HUD, HV to SV docking, thruster rebalancing, and changes to base attack, blocks, and new POIs as well. Now it is important to remember that if you are going into Alpha 10.6 to have a play around, that you start a new game. 10.5 games will not transfer. It will still work, but a lot of the new features won't be there. I'm going to suggest you jump into a creative session first in order to have a play around with all the new building stuff. One of the first things you'll notice is different in the new creative mode is a whole new experience for new players. The base at the start of the creative session contains a whole host of information for new players on how creative works, the mechanics of Empyrion, and basically how to build stuff. But if, like me, and you're not a new player, you're probably going to be interested in the new CPU system first. Check this out. First of all, spawn in a new small vessel block, just like this. Or it could be any block of your choice. Hit P to get at the control panel. You now have a brand new CPU statistics panel, which explains the tiers, their numbers, and also what devices are contributing to CPU. Also under the main control panel, you have CPU efficiency, usage, and tier over here. In the item menu, which is H by default, you can now find CPU extender blocks under each type of build. So for your SV, head over to SV, grab yourself some CPU extender blocks. To upgrade your SV to tier 2, which we can see from the statistic page, will give you 12,000 CPU. All you need to do is add a single CPU extension box. This is the SV tier 2 extension from the item menu. To bring the ship up to tier 3, we actually, as you can see in this diagram, need to add 2 of the tier 3 extensions. So grab tier 2 extension and place 2 of those. Now we can see in our statistic panel, we have 24,000 CPU points, and it's now tier 3. Same principle for tier 4, except as you can see in the diagram, you actually need 4 of these extensions. Now, just to clarify, you don't need to have the previous extensions in place in order to go to the next level. All you need are the appropriate number of the extensions you need. Also, take note that not all extensions need to connect to the core. You can connect an extension to an extension that is connected to the core. In theory, you can have all of these extensions in a long line and still get the full tier allocation of CPU points. Now we're up to tier 4, 48,000 CPU points. But what do all these points actually mean? Well, let's spawn in a small ship of mine. This, as some of you might be familiar with, is the Nightshade Mark V. A nice little starter ship. 2 GATs, nothing particularly aggressive, but it does have a warp drive, so it's quite capable. Now, if we look at the CPU statistics of this particular ship, we can obviously see that it's currently at tier 1 because all it has is a core. This is a 10.5 build, but it has 18,000 CPU points allocated to it. What we can see on the right, however, is all the stuff that is contributing to those 18,000 CPU points. And we can see that right at the very top, the most costly stuff is RCSs. Now in 10.6 that we can see that the humble RTS, which is usually responsible for allowing the ship to turn and rotate and roll, has been punished severely in CPU points, a whopping 750 points per RCS. This is just for SVs, mind. For CVs and hover vessels, the numbers vary. They've picked on RCSs because they've actually changed the flight model. So part of this new build, 10.6, is a complete change of how thrusters and the general flight model for SVs, CVs, and HVs actually works. in essence, depending on the design and shape, you don't actually need RCSs in your vessels anymore. It can work on just thrusters. I've now taken the RCSs out of this ship, and we're going to have a look at our new CPU points. We're now down to 11,000. So with one act, we've gone down to just tier 2, not tier 3, which is a little bit more achievable for a ship like this. RCSs have been completely removed. If we want to trim this any further, we could remove maybe a few thrusters, a fuel tank or two, and we might even be able to get it down underneath or down to the tier 1 CPU. However, obviously the more you trim, the more compromised you're going to make the ship in general. I'm happy to keep this at tier 2 and 11,390 CPU. But of course, I'll need to upgrade my core with an extender to make it valid again. So I'll grab my one extender. We're going to go inside the ship, find the core. Yes, might have a slight issue here. Of course, there is stuff surrounding the core, so we're going to have to try and make some room. I'm going to take the generators out, place my extender there, and then I'm going to replace my generator somewhere else, perhaps in this space that I freed up by removing all those RCSs from earlier. There we go. There we go. Now if we look at our control panel, we can see that we're now allocated the right amount. We're a tier 2 ship. We're within the 12,000, and therefore we won't have any efficiency punishment put on this ship. It will be 100% efficient. What happens if you go over the CPU allocation is that the ship will take a percentage of efficiency nerf, for want of another word, where things like your thrusters, generator output, fuel consumption, and things like that become less efficient. Interestingly, like I said before, now that we've removed RCSs, this thing traditionally wouldn't be able to move or roll. But as you can see, no RCSs on board. The thrusters are actually able to do that reasonably well. Although I might use some of my spare CPU points to add an RCS in here, just to give it an extra bit of poke. But there we go. That's basically how the new tier system works and how you can get your vessels to the new CPU tier systems. Now, to manufacture these blocks will take different components. Fortunately, the T2 extender you can just build in your constructor with normal components. If we isolate SVs again here, we can see that the CPU extender for tier 2 just requires a core, 2 of them actually, and 2 flux coils. However, the tier 3 and tier 4 require things such as small optronic bridge, and obviously the larger equivalents, large optronic bridge and matrices. These particular components, which you can see here in the item menu, look like that, and here. These things are actually only be available from traders and as drops in POIs. You cannot actually build these at the moment. So if you are building in survival mode, you will need to hunt down these components in order to build the extenders required to extend your CPU limits. That being said, CPU extensions do not appear in the blueprint requirements for any vessel that are using them. So optronic relays, bridges, matrices or whatever do not appear in the ingredients in the factory. It's just Sathium and Neodymium. So don't worry, if you're a heavy user of a factory like I am, you're not going to have to go out and find or buy these components in order to build your favorite ships. You will need to contribute a little bit more Neo and Sathium into your blueprints, but that's it. You'll be able to spawn these in no problem. Keep in mind as well that along with the CPU changes, the flight changes to RCS and thrusters are now a bit more powerful than they were. So if you're trying to get your CPU numbers down, sacrificing thruster numbers might not actually result in less performance. Ultimately, you're gonna have to play around with it and relearn some of the build mechanics with these new changes. However, I will stress, as will Elion, many times, that CPU limitations are optional. In the experimental version that is released now, it is not optional, for the intention that they want to get as much feedback as possible on this feature. However, when this version, or whatever version, goes live to the public release, Empyrion will add a switch that will allow you to disable the CPU point system, allowing you to work with all your previous builds without any kind of efficiency nerf. So do not fear, if this CPU thing completely puts you off, you can completely turn it off. The entire purpose of the CPU point system is to present another element of build challenge and help us builders think about our builds a little bit more in regards to specialization, whether it's, if we're talking about SVs, whether it's a fighter, a scout, a cargo ship of some sort, so on and so forth. What you're seeing at the moment is the new heads-up display for SVs and CVs alike. You've got all the information that you had before, although it is in slightly different locations, so make sure you take your time in creative mode to figure out where everything's been moved to. For instance, distance to ground and orbit is now in the top left of this HUD display. In both space and on planet, you have a level playfield marker in the center of the HUD as 0. Some of you might have also noticed that my max speed in this SV on this planet is 70 meters a second, up from the standard 50 from previous builds. There's also a new cruise control feature. Holding control and pressing W, you can move the pointer on the right up to dictate how fast the ship should travel and stay there. At the moment I've locked the speed in at 41 meters a second. I could slow that down by holding control and pressing S to slow the ship down, but it works more like a traditional car's cruise control than the shift W that we're perhaps used to. You want to go to max speed, hold control W down until it reaches the top, and the ship will accelerate and stay at the max speed. Also, if you want to get somewhere quicker, you can boost. Hold W to start going forward, and press and hold shift to boost the acceleration even quicker up to that top speed. On the right, bottom right, you'll also notice some new icons down there as well. Power usage and fuel usage is normal, as well as oxygen now, and warp tank capacity too. You've got icons at the top of those, including the inertia. Using the I button, you can turn inertia off in all directions apart from down, or all directions altogether, which will mean a ship will fall out of the sky, or turn them all back on. HV to SV docking has also been added. Should be able to now dock hover vessels to your SVs. I've haphazardly attached a docking pad, although it is floating off the top of Sparky here, just to demonstrate the point. You can dock a hover vessel to an SV from underneath, but you will need a docking pad on the hover vessel, on top of the hover vessel, in order to connect to the SV. This SV docking pad here, ignore that. Okay, that's not actually playing any part in this whatsoever. As long as you've got a docking pad on the top of the HV, you can dock the HV to the bottom of an SV. However, what we're probably going to find is the workshop awash with other types of HV lifting SV design. I'm just using the Nightshade here as a poor example, but we should now be able to take off with Sparky in tow and fly him around all over the planet. Now, while I'm in creative mode, the weight isn't really taken into consideration because creative mode does not have weights and volumes enabled. But when you're in survival mode, the weight of the hover vessel will be added to the mass of the small vessel. So you might find that your small vessel is unable to lift the hover vessel in some cases. In any case, you can then detach from the vessel when you're ready and carry on as normal. They're certainly going to introduce some interesting designs, I think. Some basic aerodynamic physics have been added to the game to the point where you can actually create a small vessel now which can operate entirely on forward thrusters only. I've just thrown this little thing together here as a sort of winged fighter And you'll notice the only engines I've got are these two at the back here. I could probably achieve this with just one as well, but for the sake of symmetry I've got two. That's it pretty much. There's no other engines in this thing. It's literally a fuel tank, a generator, some basics, RCSs, because obviously we only have the forward thrusters, some ammo, some rocket pods, and wings, deco. That is it. Cockpit. So in the old version of Empyrion, this thing wouldn't be able to get off the ground. Well, unless you could get the nose up, and then you could probably take off with it, but it would be quite tricky. What I'm going to do here is just press the forward key. I'm not going to touch the mouse, and we should see the ship is able to not only lift but maintain lift. If we switch to outside view, we'll get a better idea. This thing acts more like a fixed wing aircraft now, obviously more traditional. If I take the power off the throttle, we're able to maintain our height for a time until we reach a certain speed, and then the ship starts falling to the ground because we've got no thrust. So as you can see, without any forward momentum, the weight of the ship is taking over. We're now falling to the ground, but more like a graceful butterfly than anything else. So with this design, we're able to minimize our CPU usage, taking full advantage of these new physics effects, and create a fast, nimble little strike fighter that's very much designed for atmospheric flight. In space, this thing would be an absolute nightmare, so I don't advise it for spaceships, but yeah, you might need to add a little runway to your bases from now on. Although, I'll admit, landing it nice and gently on a fixed point, although possible, is going to take some practice, and it's, yeah, not exactly going to be pretty, I don't think. Oh, hang on. No, too much. Oh, there we go. Oh, no, ow. Oh, there we go. I landed it. And there we go. That's the sort of new flight mechanics. It's based on how much area you have on the bottom of the ship and the ultimate shape of the ship. I went for a sort of wedge shape kind of vessel here using the wing blocks to try and get as much sort of surface area on the bottom of the ship as possible, and also a basic aerodynamic shape. You can see how well that kind of worked, how slow we were able to go while maintaining height. Obviously the weight of the ship is pretty nothing, 9 tons, so that all helps as well. And hopefully with the 70 meters a second speed, the idea, although this is not actually tested yet, is that I can hit POIs at max speed with those rockets, getting in and out before getting shot back. But we'll have to wait and see if that's even possible. Again, for us builders, some more blocks have been added. These cylinder connectors, for example, and these funky half blocks. About 16 or so new blocks have been added to the Atlas. Some new heavy window glass connectors have been added as well, which is going to allow us to have those nice full clear glass arrangements that we've wanted for so long now, actually. And some new railing stuff as well. All for new railing. Double railing! Double railing! Yes! I didn't even know about that until now. Double railing. You have no idea. You have no idea. It's also a new hangar door model, which looks awesome. It's got rotatey bits. It does rotatey things. Look at it. It rotates. That's pretty sweet. That's pretty cool. Earlier models of the door had a weird sort of shape going on the outside, which thankfully they've removed, and it's now the same width as the original, just with a slightly better animation. Actually, there's no slightly about it. It's a much better animation. Things that spin are way cooler than things that don't spin. Simple. My construction seems to be moving. Very slowly, but it's moving. It's migrating across the screen. Where's it going? Come back, construction. What are you doing? No, you're not part of life stats. You cannot join. Construction? What are you... No! What? Why is it going over there? That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Well, I don't know what to say. I'm looking through the patch notes, but I don't see anywhere in there about the addition of a migrating construction word. No, it's just not there. Undocumented features for the win! In survival, we've been graced with some new wreckages. These can be typically found in all orbits other than the starter orbit, so happy hunting. I don't quite understand whether this is an SV or a CV. It seems to be breaking all the rules that we know. It's just teasing us, I think. Staying in survival, some new Polaris POIs have been added to snow planets, snow variants of these POIs, and they look pretty nice. Here's a cold weather farm, I think it's called. Something like that, but should be interesting and fun to discover some of these new POIs. There's also some more general changes, like balancing to the mass of fuel tanks, for example, the thruster balancing, which we touched on earlier, technical optimizations, some changes to servers, dedicated YAML, the mod API, and no update would be complete without a huge list of bug fixes. For me, the jury is still out on this whole CPU point system and tier system. At this point, I'm not really sure what it's supposed to add to the game. I get that Empyrion are trying to push for more specialization and prevent ships like the STO3 here, the jack of all trades kind of things, from being a thing. But the STO3, for example, is not really a jack of all trades. I'm not going to go and headbutt Xerax cruisers with it, that's for sure. So basically, I still think the CPU numbers and the whole strategy around this whole system needs a bit more thought and maybe a bit more work. But I remember being very skeptical about the weights and volume system when that first came along, and now don't play without it. So hopefully, given enough time and adjustments, the CPU system will also find a way to be part of our game. As it is at the moment, like I said, I'm skeptical at best. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I, for one, am looking forward to the challenge of building with CPU limits on to see what is achievable. Is that the case for you guys as well? Are you just outright against it, excited by it? I want to know, I want to hear from you. So let me know in the comments down below. And as always, don't forget, I will link to the official forums where you can submit feedback on 10.6 and the official Discord where you can feedback there as well. The developers are very keen to get as much constructive criticism back as possible in this build. That's why the experimental build CPU is mandatory. Again, for the live public release, you will be able to turn it off. Let me know your thoughts, and as always, make sure you let Empyrion know your thoughts as well. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you found this video useful, and enjoy 10.6 experimental. Hopefully, I'll see you guys soon. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.